The return of Franz Ferdinand with their new album, The Human Fear. Surprisingly, their first new album since 2018. It's been 7 years since they dropped.
And this is our first album review of 2025, so this is going to be an interesting one to see how the landscape is going to look for this year. They've actually been a band now for 20 years. That was when their first album was released in 2005. So to have that kind of longevity under your belt, that's already a great credit to them. But let's jump straight into it with the first track, which is Audacious. What did you think?
I thought this was funky, had good vibes, switched up the vibes a couple times. It's not particularly the sound I was expecting coming into the album, but I thought it was a good introduction, a decent track.
Yeah, I liked it as an intro, and this was the first single to be released from the album. I think it was last November. So to have the first single also be the first track, I thought was quite a ballsy move, but I think it works quite well. There's a very Beatlesy vibe throughout it, and I don't know if it was just Spotify, but the end seemed very abrupt.
I've got that. It just kind of ended all of a sudden.
And then the next song starts after like a second of nothing. I don't know if that was an error, if it's supposed to be like that.
I would assume it's supposed to be like that, but we'll move on to the next track, which is Everyday Dreamer. What did you think of this?
Ooh, the bass line. Oh, the bass line. My good God, this is fantastic. To me, it gives me kind of like Tame Impala vibes. It's got that kind of really nice electronic-y sounding bass. It sounds really good. There's a little bit of repetitiveness to it. It feels like it does go on a little bit too much, but I think overall I do quite like this track.
I think that amount of repetition made it kind of catchy for me as well, though. It felt like something you could learn the lyrics to, enjoy singing along to. I agree, the bass line was incredible. I don't think there's too much more to say on this track, though. I think it was pretty one-dimensional, and the best element was that initial bass line.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. We move off that onto The Doctor, which is a more upbeat, kind of fun track, and I really like the synth on this track.
This was nearly my favourite song on the album. I really liked it. I liked the energy and the tempo that it was putting out, but there was just those sections where it kept repeating Doctor. It was like Doctor, Doctor. I thought that ruined it a little bit because A, it was really repetitive, but B, it wasn't a particularly good element.
Yeah, there was a lot of ba-ba-ba-ba-bas and ahs, which is kind of forced crowd interaction. But for me, those didn't feel too egregious. They didn't feel like they were in your face. It felt quite natural. But the Doctor, Doctor, Doctor chant, I feel like live, that will actually go off. Everybody will be chanting the Doctor part. So I understand it. And we move on to Hooked, which... what the hell is going on with this track? I love it. I love it.
The initial kind of electronic feel and sound to it is really not what I expected from any Franz Ferdinand song. I know they're a bit more of like a dance rocky type band. They're not particularly indie like they used to be many years ago. I thought that this was unique and a great experiment, one that worked well. They executed the sound perfectly.
Yeah, there's like a weird low voice filter at points, and I think sometimes I don't really like that. It feels a bit cheesy. This track, it works really nicely. And I genuinely feel like if this track was released around the time of Take Me Out, it would have been seminal. This would have been a track that nowadays people would hear and everybody would get on the dance floor if it was on in a club or something like that. I think this would have been a huge track.
I wasn't a huge fan of that deeper voice filter. That was one of the parts of the song I didn't enjoy. I feel like maybe this is my problem being so criminally online, but it sounded like something that was made a bit for TikTok.
Yeah, a little bit SoundCloudy.
Yeah.
Like
it was made for people to do a clip of it, and I don't know. But we'll move on to Build It Up.
Ooh, feels like a bit of a throwback to classic Franz Ferdinand in this one. Franz Ferdinand. It's a beautiful bass line in it, as per. I think Franz Ferdinand really nailed the bass and the drums as well. They're very nice too. But by this point in the album, I'm already feeling pretty good because there's not been a single track so far that I've gone, this isn't even mid. They've all been good tracks in my opinion.
Yeah, I liked this one. I thought that this actually had the best examples of vocals on the album. A lot of what I've concentrated on so far is kind of the funky vibes and all the instruments that have been going on. But on this track, my ears perked up for the vocals for what felt like the first time. So I liked that. I like the album up to this point, but I do feel like it's all sounded pretty similar in a weird way. It's all been on that kind of experimental, electronic-y, funky rock, which isn't a problem. I agree, the tracks have been good, but I was hoping for something a little different.
Yeah, maybe something to really switch it up slightly. But I mean, Hooked was quite different, to be fair. It was a bit different to anything else we'd heard. But we move off this onto Night or Day, which follows on very nicely from Build It Up.
Yeah, this song was a little bit less chaotic, which was nice. The previous songs, there's a lot of elements, there's a lot going on, you can hear different background sounds and instruments coming in and out, but I thought that this was slightly calmer. It kept me interested.
It felt like a good carry-on from Build It Up, and it sounded similar. It had the same kind of effects on it, the same kind of structure to it, but it felt different enough that it could stand on its own. So to have this as a follow-up track to build it up, I thought that worked really well in the album listing. And also the piano on this track is really cool. I like that a lot.
But then we go on to Tell Me I Should, which had a really weird piano section, actually.
I should stay.
Oh, is it? Tell Me I Should Stay. Well, I should stay on this song and tell you that I thought it sounded a little bit kind of spooky. My description for this was, it sounded like the soundtrack for a scary Scooby-Doo episode.
A scary Scooby. Aren't all Scooby-Doo episodes supposed to be
like,
scary?
do you know if like Scooby?
Do you know when there's like a really dark one where you're like, shit, this is dark for a kid's show.
Like he's exploring a haunted church or something. This piano could be in the background.
Yeah, fair. I mean, the intro build-up for this track is fantastic. They start layering in each instrument. They start getting added in their own. And then when it fucking finally builds up to that full-on chorus, it sounds amazing. I think this is really very experimental. Not the sort of track that I would expect from Franz Ferdinand. But, you know, I'm pleasantly surprised by what they've delivered. And just everything about the track, it's the longest track on the album by about 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes. But I don't think it overstays its welcome. I think it progresses throughout the song. There is repetition, but not massively. It's not like they've just taken the same segment and kept doing it. They've moved it and moved it and moved it, and I like how it flows.
I think one thing that you mentioned there, which for me is the most important element of this track, is how it calms it down for a second and then really builds everything back up, not just once, but a few times. Great track, in my opinion.
This is genuinely a favourite track contender for me with Hooked so far.
And then we go on to a much more simple title, which I definitely can't get wrong, in Cats.
Cats. This feels a lot more lackluster, but I think the only reason why it feels lackluster is because it's come after the last track. And the last track was just so crazy and so everywhere that when they go back to this soft rock kind of rock and roll type song, it feels like it's missing something, but I don't think that it is. I think it's because I'm comparing it to the previous track.
For me, taking this as part of the album as a whole, it feels like more of an album track to me.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the songs we had previous, and especially at the start of the album. Not that that's a problem, it's still produced well, it sounds good, but I kind of feel like I've already heard this sound explored to its maximum potential.
Yeah, it's very easy listening. It felt, I want to say, safe compared to some of the other tracks. And for example, the next track, Black Eyelashes, which is just experimental from the get-go.
I thought this was pretty repetitive, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I really wasn't. I wasn't a huge fan of this one, and there was like a little guitar repeating sound kind of thing that kept going on, and I don't know why it reminded me of like, imagine James Bond was walking through Tunisia or something. It sounded like very Prince of Persia.
It's Eastern European vibes throughout it. Like there's a clear influence with that, with the instruments they've used, and I think it's interesting to see them try it. And I think they've actually hit the nail on the head with merging that style with their sound. And I really like how they've pushed themselves. And I do think that this song stands out from every other song on the album because it just seems so different.
I don't know if it particularly stands out in a good way, though, in my opinion. I agree it's got more unique sound elements in it, but I didn't think it was an amazing track.
I don't think it's a top track. I just think it's interesting enough that it caught my attention. So when I was listening to the album, I thought, oh, this track's different. And yeah, I enjoyed it.
And then we move on to Bar Lonely.
So this is another one that kind of suffers from the lackluster feel purely because of the song that comes before it. They've done this twice now where they've gone crazy song, basic song, crazy song, basic song.
For me, this was more what I expected coming into the album at the start. It was probably the most typical indie rock song on the album, which for me, being a big fan of that genre, means I didn't mind the track, but I do agree with you in the sense of it felt pretty basic. Mm-hmm. It felt like a carbon copy indie song that wasn't too unique, but also wasn't awful.
Yeah, no, not terrible. And we move on to the last track, which comes after Cats, maybe, cats and the birds. So, they might be related somehow. I don't know. Cats chase birds. Birds don't like cats.
Bro's reaching heavy right now.
This follows on nicely from the previous track that it follows up. I think there's probably better candidates on this album for an outro track, but I don't hate it.
I thought it matched the vibes of the album well. It took it down easy enough. But again, like I've said for a few songs now, I don't think it was particularly unique in comparison to 4 or 5 of the other tracks on this album. I think that there was like one vibe that was explored loads, and then a few random tracks in there to kind of mix it up a bit. But I think that one vibe, by the end of the album, I was a bit tired of.
Yeah, you'd heard it. But I think that is kind of Franz Ferdinand's style, is that is just the style that they go for, which then is going to feel tired unless you like that style kind of thing.
But on the album as a whole, what did you think, Tim?
So for a band whose first album was 20 years ago, I think this does a really good job of adding to the discography. I think this is a fantastic record. And like I say, for the longevity of a band, I don't think you can really insult this much.
No, I think it's a good album. And I also think one important thing to point out, and maybe points to why the longevity of the band is this long, is because there's only 2 of the original Franz Ferdinand members left. So realistically, the majority of the people that are working on this album have only been a part of the band since just before 2018. So I think maybe that kind of explains the complete exploration of a new sound that's very different to their original couple of albums, but could also explain why they've managed to keep it so interesting and engage people with this new sound.
I think it's a very solid album with the experimentation that they've done. I think they could have maybe honed in a couple of tracks and made them a bit more interesting, because I think if you're going to have 50% of the tracks being experimental and 50 not, the 50% that aren't are going to feel a lot less impactful versus the ones that are, because as you're listening to it, like we've done with the track listing, there's certain songs where you just switch off because you're like, oh, I just had a crazy song and now I'm hearing a song that I heard at the beginning of the album. And you kind of think maybe if they'd positioned all of those at the top and then had the experimental ones at the bottom, might have flowed a bit better.
Yeah, the album flow was a little bit strange. The thing that I thought this album was really missing was a moment of calm. Like even in the one song with the piano intro that we spoke about that was a little bit calmer, it still built up to not. There was no moment to relax, really. There was constantly a lot of sounds going on, a lot of experimentation, which in itself isn't a problem. But I think as an album listening experience, I would have quite liked a moment to just relax, and I feel like I didn't really get that.
I feel like Franz Ferdinand kind of just bring the energy, though. They've always brought the energy. They've always kind of had a fun sound to them. So I don't think it's discrediting them by saying that there's no restful parts in the album.
But I think it does kind of discredit the album. Not to a massive level.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it makes it...
I understand what you're saying. It's preference, isn't it?
It doesn't make it bad, but I think it's quite important for an album, that maybe like a moment of reflection where you can go, all right, yeah, it's been high tempo, now I can relax for a minute. There was maybe 30 seconds of that in one song in this album. So that's my only gripe. But I do think it was very unique, and I was actually quite surprised by it, given they've not made any new music since 2018. 7 years is a long time to go without a record. This sounded really polished, and yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they've taken those 7 years and clearly put together something that is a good piece of work, rather than, clearly rushing it in 6 months and saying, oh, we need to release something. We've not released something in ages. They've clearly spent their time putting this together, which I liked. But let's get on to the important part, which is the rating for the album. What would you give this out of 10?
I'd give this album a 6.5 out of 10. I think there was good elements, a little bit of repetition in sound, and that lack of a calm moment stops it. Probably been nearly an 8, but I think because of those, a 6.5. I liked it. I'll listen to it again.
For me, I'm coming in at a 7.5. I really, really enjoyed this album. I really liked the experimentation on it. A lot of the tracks were really fun and really different, and things that we'd not really heard Franz Ferdinand do before. And a lot of the times when artists kind of start to experiment with these extra styles, it doesn't really work and it kind of flops and they go in a different direction. I think they managed to really hold it all together and make it sound cohesive, and it worked really nicely. And if this album is anything to go off, 2025 should be a pretty good year for music.
Well, I would hope so. And if you're a big music fan, remember to hit like and subscribe. Let us know what you thought of this album in the comments as well. A big return for Franz Ferdinand. I'm really interested to see what other people think of it.
Yeah, I think this will be one that will kind of divide opinion. Some people will be going down the route of, oh, it's very simple and that, and some people will be like, this is the best Franz Ferdinand album. So let us know what you thought, and thank you very much for watching.
Peace.